Welcome to the Lore Tribunal, where every legend has a price and every life has a verdict. Imagine a man, the cleverest mind to ever sail out of Greece. He wins a 10-year war, not with an army, but with a wooden horse and a lie so perfect it fooled an entire city. His reward should have been simple: a short voyage home to a wife who has waited faithfully, and a son who has grown up without him. Instead, it takes him 10 more years, not because the gods hated him from the start, not because the sea was simply cruel, because somewhere off the coast of a stranger's island, blinding a monster and sailing away to safety, he turned his ship around, cupped his hands to his mouth, and screamed his own name into the wind just so his enemy would know exactly who had beaten him. That single moment of pride cost him a decade of his life, his entire crew, and nearly his wife, his son, and his throne. This is not just the story of a hero finding his way home. This is the story of Odysseus, the man clever enough to defeat an army, and still not wise enough to simply walk away. The court is now in session. Odysseus was already a legend before he ever set sail for home. 10 years earlier, when the greatest armies of Greece had battered themselves bloody against the walls of Troy and gained nothing, it was Odysseus who ended the war. Not with strength, but with a single idea. A wooden horse, a gift the enemy couldn't resist bringing inside their own walls. Here is the first thing the court must understand about a mind that clever. It starts to believe that cleverness is the only law it has to answer to. A man who has outthought armies stops fearing the consequences other men fear, because he has never once been outsmarted himself. The war won, Odysseus finally turned his ships toward home, toward Ithaca, toward his wife Penelope, toward a son, Telemachus, who was still an infant the last time his father saw his face. It should have taken weeks. His first real test came on the island of the Cyclopes, one-eyed giants of enormous strength. Odysseus and his men took shelter in a cave belonging to a cyclops named Polyphemus, and made the fatal mistake of waiting inside it, hoping for hospitality when Polyphemus returned. He did not offer hospitality. He sealed the cave with a boulder no 10 men could move, and began eating Odysseus's crew, 2 at a time, for his meals. Here is the second thing the court must understand. Even trapped, even watching his own men be devoured, Odysseus did not panic. He got the giant drunk on wine, told him his name was Nobody, and drove a sharpened stake into his single eye while he slept. When Polyphemus screamed for help, screaming that nobody was attacking him, the other Cyclope simply shrugged and went back to sleep. It was, by any measure, a perfect escape. Odysseus had already won. His remaining men were already lashed beneath the giant's sheep, sailing to freedom, undetected. And then, Odysseus did the one thing a truly wise man never does. As his ship pulled away from the shore, safely out of the giant's reach, he could not stand the thought of Polyphemus never knowing who had defeated him. So he stood at the stern and shouted his real name across the water. "If anyone asks who blinded you, tell them it was Odysseus, sacker of cities, son of Laertes, of Ithaca." Here is the third thing the court must understand, and the one that changes everything that follows. Polyphemus was the son of Poseidon, god of the sea. The blind giant lifted his hands to the sky and asked his father for one thing: not to kill Odysseus, but to make sure he suffered every possible mile of the journey home. Let him lose his men, let him lose his ships, Let him arrive, if he arrives at all, broken, alone, and late. Poseidon heard him. From that moment, the sea itself became Odysseus's enemy. Storms found him that should have missed him by 100 miles. Winds turned against him at the exact moment they should have carried him home. His own crew, exhausted and starving, opened a bag of winds they'd been warned never to touch, blowing their ship back to the very shore they'd left, undoing months of progress in a single night. One by one, over 10 years, Odysseus lost every ship, every companion who had sailed with him out of Troy. He was shipwrecked, imprisoned by a sorceress, held captive for 7 years by a nymph who wanted him as a husband, and forced to sail past the sirens' song, lashed to his own mast, screaming to be freed, because he was the only man who had ever wanted to hear it and live. Meanwhile, in Ithaca, Penelope fought her own decade-long war, holding off more than 100 suitors who had moved into her home, eaten her stores, and demanded she remarry, believing Odysseus dead. She kept them at bay with a trick worthy of her husband, promising to choose a suitor once she finished weaving a burial shroud, then secretly unraveling each night's work by torchlight, buying time for a man who might never return at all. When Odysseus finally washed up on Ithaca's shore, 20 years after he'd first left for war, he did not walk in as a conquering hero. He walked in disguised as a beggar in his own home, unrecognized by everyone except an old dog who had waited its entire life just to see him once more before it died. This is the oldest curse known to cleverness, and the court rules it plainly. The very trait that wins you the war is rarely the trait that lets you walk away from it clean. Odysseus was never punished for defeating Polyphemus. Every hero in every myth defeats a monster. He was punished for one sentence he didn't need to say, a name he shouted into the wind, purely so his enemy would know exactly whose cleverness had beaten him. 10 years, an entire crew, a wife who nearly gave up, a son who grew into a man without him. All of it, the price of a single moment where winning wasn't enough. He needed to be known for winning. Now the tribunal does not call Odysseus to the stand. It calls you. You have won arguments you didn't need to win twice. You have gotten the last word in a conversation that was already over, just to make sure the other person knew exactly who they were dealing with. How many years of your own life have you added to the journey home? To peace, to rest, to the people waiting for you? Because walking away quietly never felt like enough. Because some part of you needed your name shouted across the water. Odysseus's curse wasn't that he was clever. It's that his cleverness never once taught him when to simply stop talking and sail away. Final question for the record. The next time you win something, an argument, a deal, a fight you didn't start, will you simply walk away, or will you turn back toward the shore just to make sure they know your name? You are the defendant. The Lore Tribunal will return with Case 15. The court is adjourned.